Welcome to Talk About It Tuesday. I'm Dr. Al Freeman, Director of LCMS School Ministry, and we are joined today by Dave Kuschel. And Dave, you are, as I read right here, because I got to make sure I get the title.
You can tell them,
right?
Yes.
Senior Director, Communications and Advocacy. Dave, I know that you have a great discussion.
I do. Hopefully so.
During this time, Dave will take us through crisis communication.
Great. So I'm so happy to be here. Thanks to Al and Will here at School Ministry for inviting me and having me and collaborating with me. So I titled this, That Won't Happen to Us, right? Because I think this is a lot of kind of that perspective on crisis. Things are going well here at our school. That's so unfortunate. An unfortunate thing happened maybe at another school, but that won't happen to us, right? But sometimes things do happen to us in our schools. Al did a great job giving you this. There's me. Yes, I spent 10 years in school communications and public schools here in Missouri, 8 years plus now at Concordia Plans in communications, and 2 daughters graduates of Green Park Lutheran School here in our St. Louis area, and 1 daughter currently at Lutheran South, and 1 daughter at Concordia Chicago, and was 6 years on the school board at Green Park. So very blessed to have that experience and absolutely loved it. And as Al said, it didn't start out that way. I grew up public schools. I worked in public schools, but now here I am. I'm all in. So feel blessed to be a part of what you all are doing as educators. So I've got a few slides here. There are a lot of crisis communications resources out there. We kind of saw some things that we created in the past and shared in the past, and I've got 6-7 slides of content here that I think are a good starting point, or maybe a little more than a starting point for thinking about communicating in a crisis. You can definitely dig deeper into all of these things, and there are resources for that, and we can even help point you in the right direction potentially. But just to kind of start out about thinking about a crisis, from a communication standpoint, we can all define crisis differently, like, oh, I'm in crisis, or this is a crisis situation, or things are falling apart. What does that look like? So I just kind of thought back to my experience, and it's that event that's out of the ordinary from normal. And a lot of things happen out of the ordinary from normal, but something that's out of the ordinary from normal that is really a disruption. It's kind of a disruption to what's happening in the school, what's happening in the classroom, negatively impacted potentially someone in your school, that being a parent, a student or a teacher or someone else connected, and something that demands a response. Something that we can't just say, well, that happened and we're going to move past that because we're just going to move on, right? Something that needs a response, a communication. And a lot of times we think about crisis communications, and the first place a lot of people's minds go is the media, which we'll talk about for sure. But there's also, how are we communicating with our parents? How are we communicating with other stakeholder groups? What do they need to know? How are we reaching out to them? What can happen in a school? A lot of things can happen in a school. Some of you probably have experienced some of these things, or can imagine, right? Student misconduct, teacher or adult misconduct, leadership, financial, outside groups impacting your school, protesters, technology-wise, things with financials. I have that. All different types of things can happen. I was just telling Al before we started, I worked in a very large school district here in the St. Louis area for a few years, and it was almost weekly that something would happen, and we would say, okay, what are we going to do if this spreads, if news of this spreads?
Yeah, it's not just always large schools. I mean, I can check many of these boxes with our small schools too. So it doesn't really matter if you are, it can be a one-room Lutheran school, happen. Or you could be a very large Lutheran school.
And I had the same experience. After I left that district, I went to one of the smaller school districts here in St. Louis, and same thing, right? Things happen. Things can happen. You have to be ready for it. So really key is, how do you make yourself ready in case this does happen, right? In case a crisis comes into your world, right? So I don't think this is too, I'm starting out with this concept of developing a simple crisis communications plan, because you don't want to start from scratch in the heat of the moment, right? Something happens, are we prepared to deal with this? And there are some really simple ways to get started here, right? So I'm going to guess that your school probably already has a crisis response team, or who is responding in case something happens, right? Formalize that, right? List out who those people are. List out what that crisis response team are, what their responsibilities is. Put that in that crisis communications plan so things are all in one place. And as we know, their first priority is always making sure that everyone is safe, everyone is out of danger. So before you think about, what are we going to say about this, let's make sure that things are under control.
Yes, I will say, and kind of let me know your thoughts on this. All of our Lutheran schools should have a crisis management plan.
There you go.
And then inside of that crisis management plan, you should have crisis communication plan.
Right.
And when you say, make sure it's there, designate your crisis response team, names,
yes,
phone numbers.
Absolutely.
The emergency contacts, because when this happens, you need to be able to get a hold of those individuals immediately.
We have the same thing at Concordia Plans, right? We have our crisis response plan, and a subsection of that, a pretty big section of that, is communications. And setting the next slide, make sure it's updated, right? Always make sure that's updated, whether that's a once-a-year review. It's probably going to be good for most organizations. But to Al's point, think about communications. Who's going to do the talking? Who's going to lead communication strategy? Make sure you have all those phone numbers and those email addresses in the right place. Think about who outside the organization could be a resource to you. When I was in the school district world, we knew that if something major happened in our school district, I could reach out to school district communications professionals at 2, 3, 4, whatever neighboring districts or St. Louis area districts. And we all knew we could count on each other. So think about if things go really downhill, who can I reach out to for help? Someone at a different school, someone at my district. Maybe I have a parent who is a communications professional or who does some of this, or is a media professional, or whatever the case is. Think about who those people are that can be a resource to you.
Now, I will say this, and you might disagree with me on this a little bit, but I always say watch out when you bring a parent in, because the parent will be a parent first.
That's true.
In most cases, very rarely. So if you are in crisis mode, I might put that one a little bit farther down my list just because of that, and the relationships that you may not know about as the leader that are there.
That's a great point. You've got that school administrator perspective. I've got that communicator, like what expertise can we tap into, right?
Oh, always have your team, right? You need external people. You need people who are qualified and are there in a moment's notice.
So strategy reminders, we'll talk about that. And then communications channels. Think about what channels you already have in place. Think about what channels you would need to have in place to quickly and easily share information. What can we do on our website? What can we do through our socials? I'm sure most, if not all of you, have parent notification through text or phone messaging or whatever it is. But make sure that's all in place for when the crisis happens. You need to communicate something quickly.
Yeah, you probably want to look into something maybe like a Hootsuite or something else,
absolutely,
where you get all the channels in one fell swoop versus trying to log into each one. I've seen this in a crisis mode where people will forget. So if you don't have it written down in your communications, your passwords and your login for every single Facebook or Instagram or whatever else.
You don't want to end up having to track down the password of the person who's out of the office today or whatever the case is. Other things about getting started. So this is something that's a really important part of our crisis communications plan at Concordia Plans, is we've given ourselves a head start. So think about what are some scenarios that could happen to you, right? Something could happen with a student because a teacher could misbehave. Financial, something could happen. We could get hacked. I'm not saying you have to think of every single scenario, but if you think of some of the bigger potential scenarios, it can be really helpful to draft kind of what those starter responses would be for communicating about that topic. How would we, what's the core or what's the base of a letter back home to the parents or a social post? And we know that Twitter, if we use Twitter, we only have so many characters. And what can we do on Facebook? And it's just a place to start from. There's almost no chance you're going to copy and paste that when the time comes, but you have an opportunity that you're not starting from scratch when things are maybe feeling like they're kind of falling around you.
As a head of school, we had that. So we had about 8 to 12 samples ready to go. We were recognizing, the Instagram limits or Twitter limits. So, and we also created a focus group and had a few people from other areas and said, if we push this out, give us feedback.
Yeah, that's great.
What do you think about this one or that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So you want to give yourself as much of an advantage as you can when that time comes. If you have what Al had, that's fantastic. If you don't have anything and you want a place to start, I used to work at an organization here in St. Louis called Education Plus, and I just checked this last week. These still exist. So if you Google Ed Plus crisis letters, there are probably 30, 40, 50 different topics that they have crisis letters on that are free and to access for anybody, not behind any kind of wall. Some of them might feel a little dated because I took a look at them and they had some that probably haven't been reviewed since before I was there, which is a while ago, but it might be a good place to start.
It's better to have something than nothing so you can draft off of that. And we love to say educationally acquire for use in our educational ministry, right?
Yes, that's right. And then, of course, review your plan on a regular basis, like we talked about. Communicating during a crisis, right? So you're going to have to think about which audiences need to know what happened and how and when are we going to communicate with them. Parents are pretty much an automatic. The parents are going to need to know what happened here. How are we going to reach them? Maybe we need to reach them through something in the moment real quickly right now, and then there's something a little more longer form we want to send home or we want to email out later, whatever that case is. So what other groups need to know? Determine what other stakeholder groups might be directly impacted and might need to know. Maybe they're not first top of mind, but you can see school board or neighborhood groups. There's something happened in our school, and we should let the neighborhood association or the neighborhood, whoever that might be, know about that. And then, of course, consider who these audiences might communicate with on their own, right? They might reach out to the media. They might reach out to a bigger community group. Kind of do your best to anticipate what might come next. You can't prepare for everything, but what if I tell these people, which I should, what might they do with that information?
And we would always say, don't let your teachers get caught off guard.
Right.
Because if a parent mentions something to a teacher and they got it prior to the teacher, that creates some issues, trust issues and other things. Make sure you communicate with them. And also with the audiences, I always state too, go over this with your faculty. This should be a faculty meeting item too. What is your crisis communication plan? And here are our constituents. This is who we plan to communicate with. The typical order, because nothing ever plays out as it should, right? So you kind of say the typical order that we are thinking about is 1, 2, 3, 4. But note, in the midst of a crisis, that could change based on the situational awareness and what we need to do.
Right, absolutely.
But go through it, include them, have that conversation, and also, did we leave anyone out? Is there another constituent group that we simply missed? Probably not, but it's good to have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we're going to move a little bit into, if I advance here, messaging. So you've kind of talked about these are the folks we need to communicate with. These are the channels we have to communicate with them. These are some folks we don't want to forget. But now we're actually going to start formulating what that message looks like. The really a key point, probably goes without saying, is don't speculate. Find out what happened. Say what you can say within reason, right, where those guidelines are set up, and don't say what you don't know. It sounds really simple, but sometimes people, maybe feel like a little pressured to share as much as possible when maybe as much as possible isn't even known at that time. So be measured in what you can say, but say what you can say. I know that's vague, but don't jump too far ahead of yourself.
You should be vague, though, in many ways, and keep it simple and to the point. And you know this very well, Dave. Media will try to draw you into saying more than what you should.
That's right.
That's their job, really.
Yeah, that's their job.
Get you to talk about something. And dead airspace is fine. You don't have to fill those slots. And
we'll talk about that.
You've got your statement. Stick to the script.
That's right. That's what I got here. So you look at the bottom of the slide. Determine your 3 main points, right? It might be 2, it might be 4. But determine your 3 main points. That is what you are here to communicate. And everything that you possibly can that you're asked by maybe by a media, or maybe there's an angry parent or an angry person on your doorstep or whatever, you want to bring things back to your 3 main messaging points, because they should represent why it happened, what you're doing about it, what you're going to do in the future to prevent it from happening again, if at all possible. Those are the types of things that you want to communicate. And also, if there is an apology that's necessary, don't be afraid to apologize either. You don't want to be like, oh, I'm putting up this wall, and we never do anything wrong here at Lutheran school, whatever. We're human too. We may have made a mistake. Someone may have made a mistake.
Yeah, that's what we do at Lutheran schools too, right? We teach about law and gospel. We teach sinful world, and you recognize that sin. You ask for forgiveness, and it's granted. And that's right. That's the message to talk about. And also, I always say you can always say more.
That's right.
You can't ever say less if you let it out there right away. So you can always say, well, there might be a later statement as events unfold or something, whatever.
Right. And we're certainly, so I started working in school district communications in 2004, which is a long time ago now. But when I say control the message, it's harder these days with kids having their phones and teachers on social, everybody on social. You want to control the message as much as possible. and not let speculation and other people's speculation fill in the blanks. Definitely harder to do these days, but as quickly as you can, right? You want to get out in front of things as much as you can.
It's hard, but yeah, you want to drive it before somebody else takes the steering wheel, because they will veer way off course.
They will, and then you're going to spend so much time trying to bring people back where you could have maybe done a better job of keeping them in the right lane to begin with. In school communications, everything is about the kids. Everything is about the kids. We had a media trainer when I was in school. One of my jobs was at a consortium of school districts, and he came and trained representatives from 40, 50 school districts, and this was his main point. He's a professional media trainer. Everything is about the kids. Tie things back to the kids. We do things to take care of the kids, to keep kids safe, to provide them a good education. Everything is about the kids and what we do. If you do happen to find yourself in front of the media during a crisis situation, it can be intimidating. And it can also be intimidating for people who do this professionally. As we talked about, when I was in school districts, we had a number of things that were potential, this could hit the media, this might not, what happens if this does? And we had a number of things that did hit the media. And it can be a little nerve-wracking. So I know this one slide isn't going to prepare you. You're going to feel 100% confident if this happens to you. But these are some tips, and Al already mentioned some of these, but you certainly want to bring in extra help to handle media calls if you get to the point where things are really going nuts. When I was at that consortium, we had a school district that had a major issue going, and I and a couple colleagues went up there for 3 or 4 days just to answer phones and take messages, because the phones that keep ringing and ringing and ringing are the messages that don't get answered. It looks like you're dodging things. It looks like you have something to hide, whatever the case is. So you want to bring in extra help if you can. Don't be afraid. Like I said, don't speculate. Don't be afraid to say you don't know the answer to a question. That's okay. You're not expected to know. I mean, they'd like you to, but you can't know everything that they could possibly ask. So it's okay to say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to find out and I'll get back to you.
Maybe one of the common themes out there. I'll circle back to you, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then when you say you're going to get back to them, really do get back to them.
Absolutely.
Because that will help you in that relationship, right? Don't say no comment. You can find other ways to answer questions. You can find other ways to bring things back to those 3 message points specifically, or it's all about the kids. Don't be pressured into, tell us more about this student who was involved or about this teacher or something. Don't let them intimidate you in that way. We talked about the home base of 3 talking points. Al just mentioned if you need to think through an answer, it's okay to be silent. And this is one of the hardest things for people to handle. Think about your own personal conversations. You're talking maybe in an interview, a job interview, or you're talking to your boss, or you're talking to something, and just imagine a camera in front of you too. It's a little intimidating, right? And so don't let that silence rattle you, and take the time that you need to formulate the answer that you need to formulate.
Let me ask you a question here, because as a head of school, a former high school principal, and we unfortunately had encountered some of these items. Sometimes as a principal, and you think, I'm the principal, I need to be the one interacting, I need to be the media person.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's true, but it depends on the crisis. Sometimes you're in the midst of handling the crisis, and if you're trying to handle the crisis and deal with the media and the phone calls and everything else at the same time, it's not doable.
No, it's not.
You need to handle that first and foremost.
Right, yeah. The default would be, right, the principal, the executive director, he or she should end up on camera. And in some cases, that probably makes sense. But if that person is really, like you said, Al, is really in the heart of managing the crisis, you may need to designate someone else. And that person needs to be as much of that, to know what's happening through the crisis, kind of behind the scenes, but also be the person who can go out there on camera, deliver that public kind of commentary. I think about situations we had where that's definitely how we approached it, and you can't always have one person doing everything.
So for our Lutheran schools, many of which don't have, we had a development person, we had a counselor, we had all these positions. Most of our schools don't have that.
Right.
Who would you see as maybe filling that role?
Well,
training, because you kind of have to.
You have to have them trained too, right?
Don't let it happen. You have the crisis, and now you're trying to get this person to step in. You got to.
Well, you definitely want to have someone who is has the credibility of being affiliated with the organization, right? And so, I used to go in my last job in schools where we had the 50 or 60 school district consortium members. I would go talk through these kinds of things, and I would talk through messaging strategies because a reporter was on his way, but I couldn't be the person on camera because I didn't work for XYZ school district, right? And so you need that level of credibility, that kind of ownership as well. So that's probably a school-to-school thing. Maybe there's an assistant principal. Maybe there's a
pastor.
It could be a pastor, right? Maybe there's a teacher who's especially good speaker who is able to think through difficult concepts. But yeah.
And if there is, you want to make that known to the rest of the faculty.
Absolutely,
too,
yeah.
So
and everyone knows that ahead of time, right? That if something happens, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so is going to be right there by my side, and I've asked him or her to take on this role.
Now, I will say as an administrator, and if you have someone step in for you, you should, when the crisis is now managed or manageable, and you have that ability, then you need to engage your constituents as the leader.
Absolutely, yeah.
And let them know. We had a point person during the time who was taking care of the situation with communications. The situation is now,
stable, under control.
I always hate the word under control. I like different.
Is it really?
Yeah. Is anything really ever under control? But the situation is now at a point that allows me to communicate with you.
Yeah. And they then in that case they want to see you as the leader be the leader.
You got to come back in.
Yeah.
So don't just let that point person that maybe stepped in because you had to handle the crisis at the moment.
Right.
Do it throughout. Otherwise, you're going to lose that trust and that credibility.
That's right.
You need to reclaim it as soon as you can.
That's a great point. Yep. And then the last point here, it's all about the kids. I kept going back to this is the last slide here. Media members have a job to do. You have to remember that. I don't think most, through my experience, are automatically out to get us. So it may feel like that at times. But the easier we can make it for them to do their jobs, the easier our jobs will end up being. That said, you can't give them everything they need. You can't provide them all the access they need. We understand that. But to a point, nothing is off the record. Let's just I threw this on as another media tip. Emphasize the positive at every opportunity. That goes back to it's all about the kids. And finally, this is a temporary situation. And soon life will return to normal, whatever that looks like in your school. And it can feel really challenging. It can feel like when the media and when you have angry parent calls and you've got angry calls from all directions that things are kind of falling apart. But you will get through it.
We give thanks for all of you joining us and for Dave and his expertise and just his love and passion for Lutheran schools. And,
absolutely.
All that he does for Lutheran schools each and every day, whether it be a parent or a support with Concordia plans or on the boards, which we'll get him back onto another one later,
we'll do our best.
Or whatever else, we'll give thanks for all that.
Yes.
Dave.
Thank you, Al and Will, and thanks everyone for joining. It's been great.
Blessings to you. Have a great day.